Sino-Indian relations are confronted by new challenges. Historically, India and China were always perceived as old civilization, and India had extended hand of friendship and supported China in various forums, including seeking a place in the Security Council. During the Nehruvian era, which we also call the age of idealism, Nehru ensured that China gets its due to the extent that he declined the invitation to assume a seat as a permanent member in the Security Council on the grounds of fairness and representation. However, the 1962 war was an eye opener. China, at least the Chinese regime, never considered India as an equal. Chinese foreign policy has been one of aggressive assertion and dominance in the region. And since 9/11, China has been on a march. Some of the scholars call it peaceful rise of China. However, the peaceful rise has not been peaceful to the extent that most of the neighbors have are facing this threat of China in their immediate neighborhood. China has been asserting itself in the high seas. It has been trying to encircle India with its string of pearls analogy, wherein it has tried to circle India by developing friendly ties, investing heavily in building naval bases in India's immediate neighborhood. Chinese attempt has been to hyphenate India with Pakistan, rather render it insignificant as an important Asian power. India, which was confined to the status of South Asian power till the Rajiv Gandhi era, has underwent a drastic change. Since the days of late Sri Narasimha Rao, that is 1991, India has been on the rise in terms of its responsibility in UN peacekeeping force, in terms of cooperating with major powers to protect the high seas from piracy, to check human trafficking, to check drug trafficking. And the perception, however, in China is India is trying to cater to America's what it claims new imperial tactics. And the fact is, in the COVID era, there is a lot of debate and deliberation about movement of capital out of China, movement of industries out of China, so which will have an adverse effect on the global supply chain, that is to the detriment of China. But it is the response of the world community. It is not an attempt to cut China to size, but rather safeguard the interest of the world community in this COVID era. While the investigation about COVID will take its own due course, but what matters is every country is standing up to protect its own distinct national interest. The second fear of China is the growing proximity of India with the United States of America. The debate and deliberations on the Quad, where Australia, Japan are playing a very important role, and the co-option of India in that has created bitterness in the Chinese establishment. And China feels that India should focus more on South Asia and try to what it calls improve its relations with its neighbors. However, there have been some events which generate a very different signal. For example, the development in Indo-Nepal relations. Nepalese claim over certain territory, and the Nepalese regime's attempt to have a new map and justify that. These things can't be seen in isolation. And the tensions which had evaporated after the Doklam has also resurfaced with the recent incursions by the Chinese army in the Ladakh sector of India. Now, one could see it as some kind of economic blackmail in terms of China threatening Australia, China sending a warning to the Swedish regime when it questioned the state of Uyghurs and it could also be termed as modern gunboat diplomacy. There could be strong strategic tie-up with various countries, and countries like Indonesia and Vietnam are also responding to the situation. One must not forget that India is also the largest exporter of generic medicine, and this matters in this present scenario when the relations are pretty frosty. A former ambassador had said that in future wars would be fought in marketplaces, not in battlefields. Maybe that is quite evident when we look at the present situation. Our ties with China has always been on the basis of Panchsheel and mutual respect and trust. We have always perceived China as a friendly neighbor and an ancient civilization. Both the countries, in fact, have this historic responsibility of carrying out ties based on their own old civilizational link up. Fahian and Hunsang are classic example about China's interest in India's cultural affairs. The spread of Buddhism again endorses the historic and civilizational ties that we and China enjoy. So the present situation calls for reconciliation and also talks at the high level so that the tensions can be de-escalated on the borders. It doesn't augur well for two responsible nations, and it is also time for China to realize that India is also perceived as a responsible Asian power since the last decade or two. And the ties can certainly be based on mutuality and shared value system instead of squabbling. After all, when we talk about world politics, somebody predicted about a polycentric world order rather than a bipolar world order. The bipolar order evaporated or died down after the demise of the USSR. So it is time for nations to come together to have a healthy internationalism where they could address their respective national interests, fulfill their national objectives, instead of indulging in any kind of warmongering. So the responsibility lies on China because international community is waiting and watching. China has to be more transparent when it comes to COVID-19. The one of the issue which is also very contentious in the sense that China has its own apprehensions about the diplomacy practiced by India. India has genuine concern in terms of its stand in World Health Organization about how to proceed further in terms of investigating the COVID crisis. So it has to be taken in good faith and it must respond to the concerns of the international community.